This video is about an unfortunate incident that happened in America recently, but it's also a scientific exploration of how vaping devices work. You see, recently in America, there was a spate of people admitted to hospital with lung problems, and it appeared that they'd been vaping something, and they hadn't been vaping conventional e-liquid. They'd been vaping cannabis-type extracts with solvents, and they were from an unknown source. They weren't from some established source, so really they were vaping just unknown chemicals. And several hundred were taken into hospital with lung problems, breathing difficulty, and of those, at least 5 have died. And the Food and Drug Administration, they said, we'd strongly recommend that people avoid vaping cannabis oils until we've actually got to the bottom of this. The Centre for Disease Control took a rather more knee-jerk reaction. Maybe they were just playing safe. They said, stop vaping everything. And unfortunately, that's what the media has jumped on. They've said, vaping deaths and vaping kills, when in reality, there's no actual evidence of that at all yet. So here's the situation. The people were vaping things that you wouldn't normally find in an e-cigarette cartridge. They were vaping oil, and they were vaping something called tocopherol acetate, which is otherwise known as vitamin E acetate. And it's a kind of solvent used to blend the oil in. This is what's theoretically in these cartridges. Because they're of an unknown source, there's no real saying what was in them. And it's most likely that the combination of these caused an issue in the lungs called lipid pneumonia, which is when fats get introduced rather intimately to the lung tissue, and the lungs don't like that. They don't like they don't like breathing in oils. It's not, a great thing. Technically speaking, if the THC that people wanted, the THC, which stands for tetrahydrocannabinol, had been in some sort of water-soluble extract, then it would have gone into standard e-liquid fine and probably atomized fine, and this wouldn't have happened. But it's happened, and the main thing is here, don't vape unknown cannabisy, druggy type things if you don't know the source, because you just don't know what chemicals are in them. That is the main message here. However, the other message is that at this point in time, ordinary vaping, if you've given up cigarettes and gone to vaping, don't be alarmed by the message the media is putting out, because it's not related to standard e-liquid. And at this point in time, standard e-liquid, as best as we know, because it's a fairly new thing, is relatively safe to vape. It certainly couldn't be worse than cigarettes, could it, with 480,000 in America alone dying every single year from cigarette smoke inhalation, and of those about 41,000 being non-smokers who just passive breathed it in. I'll talk about that later on, because let's take a look at what's in actual e-liquid, the stuff that doesn't seem to cause many problems at all. Glycerin. This is glycerin here. It's a medicine as well as a food additive. It's used as a humectant. It's used to make cakes moist and keep them moist in their packaging. It's used on skin and creams. It's used to deliver drugs in both liquid form, and it's also used in vapor form. So there is research on the vaping of glycerin for other purposes. And the ingredients here are, the instructions for use here are to relieve coughs and sore throats, mix the recommended amount, which is partly 2 5 milliliter spoonfuls, with a little water and drink slowly. And you can do that 3 or 4 times a day. And this stuff is just a very sticky liquid, completely water soluble. In fact, it's so hygroscopic, it loves water so much that it actually sucks it out the air. And this bottle, if I just left it uncapped and put it on a set of scales every so often, it would gradually get heavier because it absorbs so much water out there. The main purpose of this, well, let's show you. The main purpose of this in an e-cig is to create the cloud of fog. Let me just put this cartridge in that I've filled with mixture of glycerin and just water. It's just a little bit of water to actually thin it down a bit to make sure it feeds okay. And also the water is quite important as part of the process of making the fog, as I'll show you in a moment. So this is just glycerin on its own. It produces quite a thick fog of vapour. Now I can show you what's creating that vapour. Let's jump the gun here. Let's go straight to what's creating that vapour. glycerin, propylene glycol. The other things you might find, like nicotine, in vaping cartridges. I don't vape nicotine. It's not. I don't like the novelty aspect of it. The main thing is that the water has a boiling point of around about 100 degrees Celsius, whereas the other constituents of the liquid, like glycerin, propylene glycol, have much, much higher boiling points. So what happens is that because they're all mixed together in an intimate contact in a liquid, when you heat it up in this wick with a heating element wrapped around it, then it forms little bubbles of vapour. And the vapour inside is mainly water, but it forms a little sort of bubble of the liquid itself, which is the glycerol and the propylene glycol. I should mention glycerine with an E in the end, and glycerol are all the same thing. But these little bubbles form of the glycol, and then they go pop, and they burst, and they just create tiny little droplets of the glycol that if you looked at them through a microscope, it would look like a little sphere of glycol floating in the air, and that's what the fog is. It's basically just a cloud of tiny little liquid droplets, just like real fog on a foggy day. That's what clouds are made of too, but not glycerine, they're made of water. The propylene glycol, it's used to thin the e-liquid, but it's also used as a flavour carrier because for some reason propylene glycol is a very good sort of material for mating the flavour. It enhances the flavour in some way, but on its own, this cartridge has just got propylene glycol in it. On its own, let me just blow some out. It produces a little wisp of much lighter fog that very quickly dissipates. It doesn't hang about as much. It's more sort of volatile. Maybe that's what actually mates the flavour. That's what brings it into you as such. The other things you'll find in the e-liquid are nicotine, if you use nicotine. Now, nicotine in its pure concentrated form, it's quite toxic. If you've got it in your hands, it would go through the skin, it would cause problems. You have to observe special handling precautions because it really is very toxic in its neat form. However, in its very, very dilute form, and they use only the tiniest quantity in e-liquid, then it's a stimulant, but it doesn't pose much of a risk. There's no known problem to the inhaling of nicotine alone. The real hazard in electronic cigarettes, for me, is the flavourings because they don't state what they are and they're just a whole hodgepodge of chemicals. This is the bit that is the unknown variable in standard e-liquid, and you can avoid that. You can reduce the risks associated with that by reducing the amount of flavouring, or just if you want, you just not having any flavouring at all, because on its own, the e-liquid, I mean, this vaping device here, this cloud chaser device, is just filled with a base liquid. It's 80% glycerin, 20% propylene glycol. That would normally be a 50-50 mix for devices like this, the blue device. But in this case, it's just purely that. There's no nicotine added, there's no flavouring added, and I'll describe what it tastes like on its own. So as these devices do, it produces a super thick vapour, and the taste is just a mild, sweet, neutral taste. It's not unpleasant on its own, and it doesn't have any of these synthetic chemical flavourings in it. This cartridge, on the other hand, does. This is based on standard commercially liquid, and it's called Hyzen, this particular flavour. And it's kind of got a fruity licoricey taste to it. I'm not sure what that, what it's supposed to represent. But unfortunately, to me, it represents the chemical flavourings. And you get these bottles. I mean, when you go into a vape shop, it's all about choosing the flavour. And some people believe this is encouraging kids to actually take up vaping, people who wouldn't have smoked before. And certainly, I have to say, I don't do it all the time, but I quite enjoy it when I do, just because I like the visual effect. And I could say to kids that the safest thing to breathe is air and don't take up vaping. But if I tell you not to take up vaping, that's going to make you take up vaping just out of defiance, because that's what happens. It's the same reason when I was young I tried cigarettes. They were awful. But I was told don't smoke, so I immediately went and got some cigarettes and tried it. Yeah, that wasn't a good result. It was rather nauseating. So you can, at this point in time, compared to the number of deaths caused by tobacco and cigarettes, if you consider that the people breathing this, the biggest hazard they get exposed to is the flavours. If anything ever arise in the future that there are problems with this, I don't think it's going to be the glycerine or the propylene glycol or even the nicotine that caused the problem. I think it's going to be related to some of the chemicals used in the flavourings. And you can adjust that. You can buy a base liquid from eBay in big bottles. I have a big bottle of base liquid. One moment, please. So you can buy bottles of base liquid, but note that buy it from what appear to be largest established companies that only really sell food grade products, because then you know they're going to actually make an effort and they've got batch numbers and they're sort of monitoring it and they're processing it. And this stuff here, well, it's going to last for ages. It was only about £15 including shipping. If you get this, and then you get your favourite vape flavour, and you just mix, you fill your device with the base liquid, but then just add a little drop of your preferred flavour, then you're going to get the flavour, but it's just going to be a lot weaker. It's not going to be that spraying the room with air freshener effect. Now, earlier I mentioned passive smoking and how it kills about 41,000 non-smokers in America every year. I can totally relate to that because when I was an apprentice, for a while I took a bus through quite a long bus journey in the morning to a remote branch of the company. And the bus was full of ladies going to work in factories and they smoked like chimneys. And it was just the stench, the bus was just thick with smoke. It was honestly, you might as well have been sitting in a burning building, breathing all that crap in, and the clothing just stank. And people asked if I smoked because they could smell it off me. But it was just the fact you were exposed to that. With vaping, what people are breathing in is atomized aerosol of glycerin and propylene glycol, pretty much what you find in fog fluid in a nightclub. And the aromas, if you go into toilet facility and they've got air fresheners on the wall that put out those chemical aromas, or even in someone's house, the chemical aroma air fresheners, as they call them, air polluters, I call them. You're breathing in these sort of aroma chemicals. Why do I even call them flavorings? They're aromas is a better description. So is passive vaping going to be a problem? No. Aside from the annoyance, I don't see it being any different to the people spending maybe 5-6 hours at the weekend in a nightclub every weekend with that air absolutely fogged out to the hilt. There are no obvious signs that has ever caused a problem. So compared to breathing the particulate smoke with all the other chemicals associated, I don't think passive vaping is actually an issue, other than the annoyance of some people's choice of aroma. So that's really it. If you do smoke and you've been put off by the media saying, stop vaping immediately, it's, you could make an informed decision. You can go online, you can research this, you can find that the medical industry has actually been doing quite a lot of research into vaping devices. They've looked up past research, they've done new research, and so far they've not found any major evidence that the standard ingredients cause a problem. But the one thing they're all in agreement with is the flavourings are a completely unknown variable. But now you've seen the video, now you've seen how the fog's created, and now you know what are the unknown variables here, you can make a choice yourself as how you want to do that. But at this point in time, my opinion is that if you've given up smoking, to take up vaping instead, particularly with some of the more aggressive liquids like the tobacco industry has been putting out to encourage the same sort of addiction, then I'd say, yeah, they've got to be better than cigarettes. I can't see them being more harmful than cigarettes at this time, so they are probably still the better option.